it can end with justice. We have our great poets, Tagore talking about it when he imagined that where into that haven of freedom, my father, let my country awake, where knowledge is free, where the clear stream of reason should not lose its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habits. But still, in spite of all these things, in spite of the great French Revolution, in spite of that great American Revolution for independence, we are still looking for it. We are still in search for it. Poets like Rumi, poets like Faz talked about it beautifully in a very smooth and silky voice. But poets like Kabir, poets like Faz protested, resisted. Literature we know, and poetry, in fact, especially, is always a voice of protest, always a voice of resistance. When Maya Angelou, in her poem, And Still I Rise, talks about justice, or when Martin Espada looks at the poetry as the republic of justice, and when Langston Hughes, in his poem, I Too, wants to sing for America, but he also says, let America be America as we dreamt of. When the Iraqi poet, Donia Mikhail, I hope, the poem is titled as Iraqi Nights by Donia Mikhail. When she talks about justice, when Naomi Shihab talks about justice in Red Brocade, and when Dennis Smith talks about justice in juxtaposing the black boy and the bullet. So here we are, our own Indian poets, the poets whom we love very much, respect very much, admire very much, and look towards them with a lot of respect, with a lot of awe. Here we are, we have Sanjukta Dasgupta ma'am, we have Sukrita Paul Kumar ma'am, Jaideep Sarangi sir, Ashwani Kumar sir, Nabina Das ma'am, Ranu Unial ma'am, and Sama Afreen. So before I go ahead, I would like to request our respected chairperson ma'am, or rather I would request Sanjukta Dasgupta ma'am to accept to chair the session. And we have such a big name, such a great name, such a respectable name in Indian poetry. Sanjukta Dasgupta, professor and former head, Department of English, former dean, Faculty of Arts, University of Calcutta. She has been the recipient of Fulbright postdoctoral fellowship and Fulbright Scholar in Residence Grant, Australia, Indian Council Fellowship Grant, Gender Studies Fellowship Grant, University of British Columbia, among others. She has been invited to participate in conferences and teach or lecture at universities in the USA, UK, Europe, Canada, and Australia. She was the chairperson of Commonwealth Writers' Prize jury panel at Melbourne and Malta, respectively, in the year 2003-04 and 2004-05. She has also been invited as visiting professor to deliver courses or a series of lectures on Tagore and also on nation and gender. She was granted Charles Wallace Trust UK Translators Fellowship to work on her project on Tagore's daughters at the University of East Anglia. She was the co-principal investigator of the India-US Knowledge Initiative Program, working on women entrepreneurs engaged in eco-friendly business. In this connection, she visited several states in the United States of America in the year 2016 and 17. She is the president, executive council of the Indian Poetry and Performance Library, ICCR, Kolkata. And in the year 2018, Sahitya Academy nominated her as the convener of the English Language Board and also the member of its General Council. In 2018, she taught at the university. She taught at a university at Poland as visiting professor. She received the IWSFF Women Achiever Awards, Calcutta, in the year 2019. We all know that she is a poet. She is a short story writer. She is a critic and a translator. But it is just for the information of our young audience, our young participants, that her published books so far are like the novels of Huxley and Hemingway, In a Study in two planes of reality. Responses, selected essays, snapshots, which is a collection of poetry. Dilemma, which is again a collection of poetry. First language, a collection of poetry. More light, again a collection of poetry. Her stories is a translation. Mani Meher is also a translation. The Indian Family in Transition is a co-edited book. Media, Gender and Popular Culture in India is a co-authored book. Tagore at Home in the World is a co-edited book. Radical Rabindranath, Nation, Family and Gender in Tagore's fiction is again a co-authored book. Tagore's patriotic song is a beautiful translation by her of the songs of, or rather the patriotic songs of Tagore. Abuse and Other Short Stories, towards Tagore, a collection of essays, and Golpo Sankalan, which is translated, which is basically a translation of Bangla short stories published by Sahitya Academy. Lakshmi Unbound is a collection of poetry. Claiming a Space for Australian Women Writing is a collection of poetry again, perhaps. Sita's Sister is a collection of poetry. Sita's Sister is a collection of poetry. Ma'am's area of interest lies in post-colonial theory and texts, colonial and post-colonial women's writing, gender studies, migration and diaspora studies, literature and film studies, women in Indian films, translation studies, and creative writing. So we welcome her as the chairperson of this session. We welcome all our respected and admired guests today. We welcome all the participants also. And with the deepest core of our heart, I, on behalf of our department and on behalf of my college also, extend a very warm welcome to our poets and to our participants. Sanjukta ma'am, I request you to accept the chairmanship, or rather the chairpersonship of this event. And please, I request you to let us go ahead with the program. Sanjukta ma'am, please.
Thank you, Dr. Ibrahim. Can you, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. You are audible.
Thank you, Dr. Ibrahim, for that very, very generous introduction. A very good evening to all the panelists, as well as to all the participants of this webinar, the new signifier in our vocabulary, which has suddenly emerged from the month of March. And I'm not too sure how much we are going to be part of webinars, or whether some of us would like to go back to seminars. That will require a seminar to talk about, or a webinar for that matter. But I'm very happy to be here today amongst some of the most outstanding poets who are writing in English in India at the present time. And of course, I have to also mention Boshidhara Roy, who has been sending me WhatsApp messages and emails all the time, and also with immense patience about my endless queries, which are really meaningless. But you can understand, if you are, as Ashwini said, if you are Professor Emeritus, then of course you are full of those questions. And of course, our university doesn't even recognize that particular designation. So I am really very happy to be here this evening, and to be among those of us who think and write at this time, when sometimes you feel that even your thoughts have been locked down. The internationally acclaimed poet T.S. Eliot had described poetry as excellent words in excellent arrangement and excellent meter. That is what is called the technique of verse fused with the technique of feeling. Can this be an inclusive definition of the art of poetry? The distinguished practicing poets assembled on this platform this evening, all of you will probably agree with Eliot, and also agree that poetry can be intensely subjective and deeply political. Poetry can engage the universal and philosophic at the same time. It can seamlessly and audaciously fuse cosmos and cosmetics with creative confidence. Protest and social justice have been intrinsic and integral components of poetry throughout the centuries in all languages, from the ancient and modern epics to the poetry that is being written now in the 21st century. Writing poetry to instill social awareness and raise consciousness can be regarded as a poet's activism. Poetry can only be written in an environment of complete creative freedom, along with or despite the macro issues of state politics that can well be the subject of poetry. We recognize that poetry addresses with zest the micro politics of daily living, sometimes with angst and often with a sense of transcendence. Most often, poets accept that the personal is the political, and we know that the political identity of a thinking individual is as inevitable as breathing. Cultural repression, regulatory bodies of thought control, myopic ideologies, and fundamentalism destroy the creative spirit of the poet. Aesthetic use of metaphors, images, symbols, and rhythm are the essential components of a genre of poetry, but these poetic tools do not elide, evade, and escape from representing the truth in its empirical, epistemic, and ontological configurations. I would strongly advocate the English poet Shelley's arguments in his essay, The Defense of Poetry, which was banned for a period of time and then again released to the public, where he states that the roles of poets are like historians and literary archaeologists as they reveal and revalue the past and play the role of progressive pathfinders and visionaries. So Shelley observed, I quote, "Poets are not only the authors of language and of music, of the dance and architecture and painting. They are the institutors of laws and the founders of civil society." And of course, the one-liner, which many of us often refer to even out of context, is the way Shelley described poets as being the unacknowledged legislators of the world. If poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world, let us turn to just very quickly, a couple of poets of whose writing I will just read out a few excerpts. The first poet that I choose to read out from his writing is Pablo Neruda, often forgotten in terms of his concerns for the world and looked upon as a poet of erotica. So I'm referring to a poem that Pablo Neruda wrote referring to the horror of fascism, which was experienced during the Spanish Civil War. And the poem is titled, "I'm Explaining a Few Things." And he asks, "You are going to ask, and where are the lilacs, and the poppy-petaled metaphysics, and the rain repeatedly spattering its words and drilling them full of apertures and birds? I will tell you the news." And then he goes on to say, why doesn't his poetry speak of dreams and leaves and the great volcanoes of his native land? Come and see the blood in the streets. Come and see the blood in the streets. Come and see the blood in the streets. Let's turn towards home. Qazi Nazrul Islam. And Nazrul had asserted that I will remain forever the brave rebel. I have risen all alone, severing the fetters of the world. I will hold my head high forever. Ami chiro bidrohi bir, ami bishsho chharai uthiachi eka, chiro unnoto shir. And then let us turn to Rabindranath. Tagore, who had alerted us that poetry and free thought can blossom in a free and fearless environment. Professor Ibrahim has already referred to this particular poem, but I think this session should really start with a poem like this, which is really like a prayer or can be also regarded as a poet's manifesto, where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out from the depth of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit. This evening, with poets from all parts of India who are assembled here on this virtual platform, maintaining social distance, but also asserting social proximity and solidarity of the human spirit. I would first invite Sukrita Paul Kumar, who I would like to introduce first, not only in terms of what I have written here, but as Sukrita has been a friend for a very long time. And at that time, we could travel. And we met at Hyderabad for the first time at the ASRC, if you remember, Sukrita.
Yes, yes.
And I don't know how you keep on looking the same, though many decades have passed by.
You.
And so Sukrita Paul Kumar was born and brought up in Kenya and currently lives in Delhi. She's a well-known poet, critic, translator, and an artist. Till recently, she held the Aruna Asaf Ali Chair at the University of Delhi. An honorary fellow of the prestigious International Writing Program, University of Iowa, Cambridge Seminars, and a former fellow of the Indian Institute of Advanced Study, Shimla. She was also an invited poet in residence at Hong Kong Baptist University, China, honorary faculty at the Durrell Center at Corfu, Greece, and a recipient of many international fellowships and residencies. She has published several collections of poems in English that include Dreamcatcher, Without Margins, Untitled, Apurna, Folds of Silence, and Oscillations. Her two bilingual collections are Poems Come Home, with Hindustani translation by Gulzar, and Rowing Together, with Hindi translation by Savita Singh. She was the guest editor of Crossing Over, a special issue of Manoa, University of Hawaii, USA. A number of Sukrita's poems have emerged from her experience of working with homeless people, tsunami victims, and street children. Sukrita Paul Kumar. And from this bio, we also know that she has an empathetic spirit towards the wretched of the earth. So over to Sukrita Paul Kumar, and you know that you have to talk about yourself and then read your poetry.
Yes. After such an erudite talk, Sanjukta, I'm kind of dumb, absolutely muted, though I had unmuted myself here, right? Thank you, Basu. Thank you, Professor Ibrahim. Thank you, Sanjukta, for your beautiful introduction, which was really long. And but it's challenging always to live up to one's introduction, isn't it? So anyway, I think to begin with, I was just wondering how to really connect with everyone on this. You see, talking about poetry, I feel that the couple of words that immediately come to one's mind are, of course, expression and communication. But when we say expression and communication, immediately the third word that comes to my mind is connect. And then following that, I wonder, connect with what? And I've often thought of this because I think one of the major things that happens, one of the experiences that are very valuable to a poet, is to connect with one's own self. And somewhere in this lockdown period, in a way, I think there was this opportunity for the privileged, of course, for the privileged class of people such as us, in a way privileged because we had the wherewithal to sit and take a journey inward, which of course in writing poetry is inevitable. We've got to do that. It's inevitable that we contact our inner soul, inner being, inner whatever, subconscious, from where we dig out perhaps an experience which is extremely compulsive in terms of seeking expression. That is perhaps the reason why one wants to express. It is in search of some kind of, a certain kind of truth. And then immediately one thinks of Satyam Shivam Sundaram, which comes to one's mind because you want it to be beautiful, the expression. You want it to be truthful. You want to be truthful to your own self also, first and foremost. And as I said, this connection with oneself, if it gets established in that so-called inspirational moment, I think that's where you connect with the larger, what I might call being, which actually means it's a very inclusive self. It means the world out there is internalized. And within oneself, you are groping for the whole macrocosmos, you know. So it's this little micro self that expands into a macro, as it were. And what comes to one's mind immediately is the Adi Kavi, Valmiki, who actually, you know, I mean, how did he write the first, or how did he utter the first poetic verse? It was when he connected with the suffering of the lovebird who had fallen with an arrow inside, an unsuspecting lover who just fell off, and the mate started to weep and wail, the bird I'm talking about. And through that, when the Kavi, when the poet's heart is aroused, and the suffering becomes his as much as that of the bird out there suffering, that's when the connection happens. That's when those words kind of come alive. And what are these words? They're not mere words. Empathy, compassion, suffering, all poetry seems to be coming out of that. And out of that, there is that note of initially to start with a kind of a reaction, and it gets converted into a creative act because you want to express. You want to then define this or somewhere express it, not really define, because you don't want any borders around it. You don't want it to be framed, but you perceive it in a way that it compels you to discover new metaphors, unique ways of saying something which otherwise you have never experienced. The unique in itself, the unique experience demands a unique form, a unique set of words, which include metaphors and similes and all of that. And some composition comes up, however incomplete it may seem to you. I mean, to me, basically, all my poetry, I feel, it comes out of the sense of incompletion. I mean, I write one poem, I'm thrilled that the poem is complete and I come out with the last sentence, last line. It looks as though it is complete, but just for a moment. I would not go to the next poem if I were to have the sense of completion. Let a few days pass or a couple of hours pass maybe, and I begin to again feel very restless to go into my insides to actually discover something else, some new thing, something that might sort of trigger off an experience which leads to a compulsive expression. It's almost like do or die. You know, poets are martyrs. They do suffer. There's nobody who's kind of telling you under gunpoint to write a poem. Why should you be sitting inside and taking these almost horrifying journeys at times. Because when the words don't come to you of the experience that you might be going through, sometimes there is a mismatch. And the suffering that one goes through, it's very easily said, oh, I had a block, I couldn't write. But you know what that means? It's also a nightmare if you get into that state. It's a nightmare because you're not able to find just the right word. And that's why there are lots of us poets who are also struggling to write poetry on writing poetry, How do you experience this whole process? In itself, it's a suffering. In itself, it is having to carry a cross. Now, that's as much as, the process is concerned. But also when you think in terms of, I would say, the word with which I started, connect. The moment one tries to connect with, it's not even having to try, you just connect. If you have empathy, if you have compassion, if there is a sensitivity, which all of us, all human beings have, I think that connect, the moment the suffering is witnessed, off comes something that one wants to express then in terms of trying to comprehend the chaotic way in which we are living, which includes exploitation, oppression, all kinds of suffering that other people are going through. So one of the poems that I think I would read at this juncture, which came out of my experiencing racism in Kenya, first of all, and then, of course, the suffering that one connected with when it came to, the blacks and the whites in the US, a country where most of us go often to, thinking of it as the American dream, and eventually realize it's really a nightmare, not a dream. So this was when I read The Beloved by Toni Morrison. And suddenly all of the, racist kind of experiences accumulated and came banging and knocking at the door of my consciousness. And I came out with this poem, which I wrote, and it's called Color That Bleeds. Who knows when the earth was split into black and white? No record of any earthquake then, nor of any planetary catastrophe. Is history lying buried in unseen vaults under the seas? The ocean, Walcott had said, keeps turning blank pages looking for history. The one of lamentations on diving into turbulent waves of the ocean, peaks and darts of black history hit and hurt. My daughter, ashamed, shoved it into the waltz, her blonde Barbie doll with bluest eyes. And in the real fictive world, the little baby brutally killed by mama comes haunting back into the pages of Beloved. Death saving her from return to slavery. What's not white is beauty wasted. It's just color, said she, to people not listening. White smoke and muscle pulling the cultural engine. White becoming whiter, black blacker. Supremacy at one end, and on the other, black screams and yelps in search of their Africa, held in the warp of time. Stained history petrified, written in invisible ink, raising its hood again. And yet again, the bite, poisonous, is yet to kill.
Excellent, excellent. Very powerful.
Thank you. So it just came, with all the cumulative experiences of racism. And many of us, I think could think of also writing essays on racism then. But I think some of us who are kind of addicted to creative writing, I think when we are deeply touched, then this is a form of protest in a way. Protest which you sort of see coming from the gut, as it were. And that gut finding itself totally lost. And in order to me, even poetry, I think to some extent, is sorting out the chaos, even if ultimately it creates more chaos, But it's basically to try to sort that out, the chaotic mind, which is trying to comprehend the injustice, the social injustice, the tragedies, and man-made, and I emphasize on mad here, man-made, problems in the context of living. Similarly, I think there is another poem that comes to my mind, which closer home when I was sort of, going through this whole period of initial lockdown, when we initially were looking at how, the migrant labor and all the atrocities, and we sitting at a distance, and clicking our tongues in pity and sympathy, and it looked so kind of artificial because we are not on the roads, we are in the privileged condition. All we can do is to write a poem, maybe, and suffer through that poem, connect with that, with their suffering. So here are a couple of small things. In those days, in any case, I was doing a lot of writing, addressing myself to, Ganga. And in my dialogues with Ganga, I wrote a few poems now recently, and I'll just read a couple of them. With the inner eye you lent me, O Ganga, I could see. I could see Jesus with a stethoscope, carrying the sick and the old across your turbulent chest, your waters stilled, ghosts rising from your depths to dance on your glassy surface, leaving no footprints for others to follow. O Ganga, say, will Jesus reach your shore across, leaving us behind? Second one, which comes more out of immediate, kind of relatedness that I saw between the migrant labor of today and the way kafilas were migrating in 1947. Carrying babies and sacks of deflated dreams, dragging bleeding heels, thousands homeward bound, unlike the kafilas of 1947, they have definite homes, without roofs or walls though. Fixated and resolute, they move on, leaving behind the blinding urban glitter, collapsing, rising, breaking, fragmented, as in 1947, happily dying of starvation and fatigue, not of the virus. Happiness comes like the feel of wazoo, or ablution, or Ganga Jal on dead bodies. So this is actually a series of poems, and that just kind of gave you a sample of two. And I've been wondering as to how, some of these things, some people, like in the case of, say, Faiz, for instance, when he were to protest, he would protest in such a way that even poetry would not sound sloganal. It would be poetry. And so there are subtle ways of protesting, though perhaps what I want to say is that all poetry actually is rooted in dissent. All poetry is questioning the establishment. All poetry is reacting to all of that, though it is in the form of a creative act. So do I have time, Sanjukta? Or is
I think if you can read a short poem and conclude.
Yeah, sure. So how would I not sort of read the poems which are so, I think, appropriate here, which is again series of these short poems that I wrote when I was working with the homeless people. And again, social justice and all of that comes to one's mind. But that sounds like a very superficial term also, social injustice. When you actually go through it and you go under the skin of the suffering of the people who are always seeking for a home and are not getting it, and somehow I seem to be linking up with that. It could be a mental state, always in search of a home, as if. Because I think I would like to refer to my father as a refugee when he came in 1947, crossed the border. And he used to often say that I don't think I'll ever cease to be a refugee. I've left my home forever. So all his life it was. And then he passes on that experience to us children. Very unfair, isn't it? But that's what he did. Anyway, here is one of the poems that I did when I was working with the homeless people in Delhi. Dreams are to be dreamt in sleep, to die when the eyes open. Deny them, dismiss them, for the green pastures are nowhere. Dreams sink like paper boats when belief sits in them. Each day, I must work, I must earn, eat, just so that I go home. But that too is a dream, I confess. Thank you.
Thank you, Sukrita. That was absolutely brilliant.
Thank you.
You covered such a distance, geographical distance, starting with Kenya and then coming to India, and then again referring back to 1947 and the horror of 1947. That is absolutely a trauma that we will never forget. And of course, you also talked about poetry and also the pain of writing, the pain of creation, rather than you, almost, you are not an Wordsworthian at all. No spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings and emotion recollected in tranquility, which we had to learn by heart to pass the exams. So for you, of course,
I never passed it.
Yeah. So it is more about Eliot as poetry being an escape from emotion. You had to write it. It had to be born on the page so that you could relax. So from Sukrita, who has really set the mood of this evening with her very, very powerful poems of dissent, protest, of interrogation, and also ones which are so aesthetically well wrought. Let us move on to Jaideep Sarangi, who is a bilingual poet. He's a translator. He is a professor of English and also a part of our own IPPL, as we call it, the Intercultural Poetry and Performance Library, of which he is the vice president. And Joydeep has an empathetic heart. And he taught me empathy when I was absolutely an Anglo-centric scholar. And he said, you better learn up Dalit literature and come and do a keynote address. So that is how Jaideep really trained me, and I'm very, very grateful to him. He's a widely acknowledged bilingual poet, editor, and academic anchored in Kolkata. Sarangi is on the editorial boards of different journals featuring poetry and articles on poetry like Mascara, Literary Review, Transnational Literature, Australia, Setu, USA, Gitanjali and Beyond, Scotland, Tista, and WEC, India. He has 7 critical books on poetry and edited special issues on poetry for reputed journals in India and abroad. With Amelia Walker, he is guest editing for a special volume for Text Australia. Among his recent awards, the Setu Award of Excellence for 2019 from Petersburg, USA, not Saint. He is a professor of English and the principal at New Alipur College, Kolkata. And the rarest little information that I will give you is that he's a much loved principal. Generally, principals are the punching bags of every institution, but not Jaideep. Everybody loves him. Okay, over to you, Jaideep.
Thank you, Shangjukta. You are always inspiration for me and many academicians, writers in Kolkata and beyond. Respected Chair Shangjukta, City Karim College, or Karim City College, Jamshedpur, Department of English, Dr. Ibrahim, and Bashudhara. Wonderful initiative for like this in poetry event by webinar. It's a new mode of survival in the days to come. And I have special words of thanks to Karim City College because recently we have collaborated and we are looking forward to another big poetry event with our college involving Catherine Cole, the biographer of A.D. Hope, in the very soon. My actually thanks and gratefulness to all co-panelists and poets whom we are following day and day after day. So Shukrita Di, to Ranu Di, and Ashwini, everybody are so genuine. Navina Di, we are following you each and every day. We are learning the spirit, the art of writing poetry, and let it be infectious. Thank you all co-panelists. Now, poetry, the first thing that comes to my mind is, of course, the Chilean anti-poet Nicanor Parrar. How can we forget those lines? United States, the country where liberty is a statue. We all know the Statue of Liberty, but how the Statue of Liberty has been used metaphorically with a sense of political attack, we'll say political positioning. So poetry is political, poetry is powerful, poetry is effective expression for the immediate and beyond. At the same time, how we can position it vis-a-vis the poetry of Pablo Neruda. Neruda is one poet who has written about small little things about life, like potato, tomato, apple, chair, bread, heater, car, soap, then ode to my sacks, ode to my socks, and then what not. So following Neruda, we understand how small things in daily acts are important for poetry. Anything can become part of our imagination with effective expression, and we create a poetry out of it. I will say we are made of all those who have built and broken us. That is the movement within us. We all who write feel a movement, either a short story writing or poetry writing or creating something. There's a movement through words. And once you find an expression, you find a place by articulation or by writing, you come to a normalization of the movement by the artistry of words. Now, which poet you will come back to again and again? That is very important, because some poets you want to read again and again. I think before the bedtime, early in the morning, in the afternoon, or maybe in a crowded place, maybe on a rainy day. That is the hallmark of poetry, I think. As Shangjukta quoted Tagore, that is for pains of life. When we bleed on the thorns of life, we come back to Tagore, because possibly we associate our pain with Tagore's realization and Tagore's expression of pain. When we feel some kind of separation, some kind of uprootedness, some kind of, kind of boredom, kind of things that, give you a stagnant place. Possibly you read Kids and all windows are opened up. Kids has everything for our sense organs. It's a festival of sense organs. That is magic. That magic is, I know, very unique. If the poet can create that magic, that when we are reading the poem or writing the poem, our nose is busy, our ears are busy, our mouth is busy, our eyes are busy, and we can feel the tactile sensibilities. Suppose reading Ode to Nightingale. We have everything, all sense organs. That is, I think, the best part of one of the essential parts of a poet. But poetry is at the same time very much political, as we started with. In this connection, I will read one of my poems from my recent collection. The title of the poem is Everything is Political. At times, even a simple flight of a pigeon is political. A bird's beak of tears is the popular trade of blood. The shore keeps me awake. Where are the refugees of the world? I try to wear the weight of living, singing a song of the door of many doors, the dark one, history, making no secret of lies. Possibly, a poet's involvement, commitment to the immediate and beyond is his engagement. All poets are rooted in the milieu and in the kind of atmosphere where he or she is creating. Now, at the same time, how can we forget the tempo of the day, the civil rights, the social justice? If we read the poems of the Aborigines or the Maoris or the Dalits, as Sanjuktadi, I am humbled by Sanjuktadi's comment, but if we shoulder the pains of the Dalits, but the kind of anger, the kind of angst about the age-old oppression that is being, expressed through the language of music, and sometimes it becomes an index of our painful survival in the pyramid of social structures. Now, very important, if we live into the marginal discourse or the poetry of resistance, the tempo can be summed up in one word, as Arjun Dangle said, who can deny the sun rising? Who can deny the sun rising? That means the sun rising is possibly the world of justice, the world of equality. No one can deny the sun rising. It is a matter of time, matter of space, matter of ages. The sun will be there, of course, and the night is not permanent. So a poetry is a creation and it talking to the heart. How you communicate to the heart. In this connection, I read a poem of only 2 lines. This game is life. I am sick of the stars. Let's go home. Let's go home and turn off the lights. There is another poem in the collection, Beyond the Camp. Suddenly it's evening, shadows dancing, men facing another one. Dead, never again from the pit of dark. End of the tunnel, a hollow yesterday. The rain is with me, slow rain. The green of the hills reminds me the life is darkly sown. There are always some stories sob on my doors. I keep them awake. Now, for me, poetry is an engagement with ordinary things. We all talk about the big rivers like the Nile, the Ganges. There are so many poems from there. but the little rivulet, the small and rivers, small happenings, small something that triggers up your imagination, and you come back to your table or maybe somewhere and you write up the chronicles of your surrounding with the wheel of time, and you make out of something that is called super poetry. I read another poem from this collection, Your New Landscape. The room light haunts me, like her hot breath rising. I don't want to be Lorca or another Sepharis. I want a cold shower, an anonymous voice. I shall wait for your stories after you visit another home of love, of your choice, your descent. Orange, watermelon, ripe in time. Now you move with the wind, smile through the sun, burning. You cross oceans and mountains, a gift that I lost, landscape. You make me lonelier. You make me a poet at heart. I carry on with a rock pace. You wind my dreams. I hear you speak from the cloud. You try to describe a kiss. I know you are happy. I still care your moves. I prepared them for the world in both hands with my touches. Now you have no time to fall back on me, poor me. You can only fly with crafted wings, busy with saplings green. My house has hues, flowers of you for your golden return. Now poetry is something that you feel at heart. You communicate to heart. You speak that out. And poetry for me is writing about your heart and writing to the heart. I read another poem, Rain in My House of Poems. I don't know why I am haunted by rains. And many Indian poets write about rain. Rain in Kotak, rain in Bhubaneswar, like Jayanta Mahapatra, Bighu Padi, and many poets have written about rain. After the rain, I want my ideas to change. Like clothes, to take them off. And the poem, I got her back. I begin to speak in my tongue, eye to eye, faithfully. With these words, I think, it's a painting of my house. Painting is my form of thoughts. How you paint with words, and that selection of words is one of the important preconditions of poetry. And we read again and again, whether it's something called poetry in the ear or not, connecting each other, one metaphor to another metaphor, maybe reading another's poems, celebration of the journeys of other poets. If we read translations, because Neruda we cannot read in original, maybe suprasegmental features are missing, but the staff will engage you. Reading is an engagement. Reading contemporary writers, contemporary poets is the hallmark of any poet. I had an opportunity to visit Jayanta Mahapatra's house several times, but in Tinkonia, Bhagicha, I found his house is full of books. Encyclopedia of Australia, Encyclopedia of New Zealand. What is to do with poetry? What is to connect with his poetry? Poetry is knowledge. Poetry is performance, acting out in words. Thank you, Karim City College, for this golden opportunity to opportunity to share with some of the big names of Indian English poetry these days. Thanks to the chair, thanks to the department, thanks to my co-panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Jaideep. Brilliant reading of your own poems and also your reflections on poetry, almost carrying forward what Sukrita began with about the horrifying journey. You are calling it a movement. We are using those common words like resistance and resilience, and also the poetic distancing that we also need to do, or else poetry would become like some sort of a polemical write-up. And so we move to our third poet of this evening, Ashwini Kumar, who I'm never destined to meet in Kolkata. When he is in Kolkata at the IPPL, then I'm not in Kolkata, I'm somewhere else. And then again, we met at Guwahati, and now I'm meeting you on a virtual platform. Let us hope someday we will be able to meet in Kolkata when all this social distancing is over. I cannot imagine that social distancing will be something permanent in our lives. So Ashwini Kumar is Indian English poet, writer, and professor at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. It's a fantastic institution, and also the infrastructure is something that takes one's breath away. His anthologies, My Grandfather's Imaginary Typewriter and Banaras and the Other, have been published by Yeti Books and Poetry Wala respectively. His poems translated in Indian languages and Hungarian are noted for lyrical celebration of garbled voices of memory and their subversive whimsy quality. His Banaras and the Other, first of a trilogy on religious cities, was longlisted for the Jaidev National Poetry Award 2017. Recently, his select poems have been translated for a special volume, Architecture of Alphabets, in Hungarian. He is also author of Community Warriors and one of the chief editors of LSE's prestigious publication, Global Civil Society, Poverty and Activism. He is co-founder of Indian Novels Collective to bring classic novels of Indian literature to English readers, and curates popular TIS Literature Fest and Rajni Kothari lecture series in Mumbai. He's also a visiting fellow at leading global universities and think tanks, including London School of Economics, German Development Institute, Korea Development Institute, University of Sussex. He writes a regular book column in the Financial Express. In his leisure, he repairs Derrida's punctured cycle and makes Bihari Litti Chokha crooning. I think you should croon that better. Ooh la la la, hi, Mary Fantasy. So I give you Ashwini Kumar. As you understand that he is multi-talented and he's able to speak in, write in the Financial Express and yet write poetry. That is quite an achievement, from finance to poetry.
Sanjukta, you have been very kind and very generous, very kind and generous. And it's for us, it's kind of a redeeming experience, listening to you. And I'm really sorry that we couldn't meet last time when I was, reading my poems in Kolkata. And partly maybe Jaideep is responsible. He just somehow we just couldn't manage to do it. I find some problem with my, setup here. Somebody is presenting something. Dhananjal, can you stop presenting?
Yeah, I don't know how to do this. I am very...
Yes.
Vashudhara, can you manage it?
Yes, sir. Just a second. Dhanjal ma'am, you're presenting. You just click the stop presenting button on your mobile.
Yeah.
Dhanjal ma'am, if you can hear us, could you just click the stop presenting button on your mobile? Thank you so much, ma'am. So much.
Thank you, Vasu. And thank you very much, Vasudhara and Dr. Yahya for inviting us to this wonderful poetry festivals. For me, it's like homecoming, going back to, Jamshedpur, born and brought up there like a wild, Mowgli, long back, when I don't remember when I was born there. It's a long history. Somewhere I have written about it. And I'm also very grateful to, friends like Sukrita ji, Sama I can see here, Navina is there, Ranu I can see. I mean, like, it's wonderful. I mean, like, what else do I need from, from this virtual world, It's far more real, it seems. So let me do one thing, I will be quick and, as you know that most of us at TIS seem to be quite organized, I mean, like, that's the expectation. So I will try to do, a textual presentation, very short presentation on poetry and protest, and then I will read a couple of poems. I can't make Litti Chokha right now, but certainly I will, try to croon in Bihari. Let's see what
Yeah.
Bihari. That's my next book also, Bihari from Aleph. Let
That
me see
sounds
when I can, publish this book. So it goes here. This is untitled, a short essay that I've written for this poetry festival. Vasudhara has been talking to me about poetry and protest. So I hope it makes sense to all of us. It's untitled, and it goes like this. Since time is limited and occasion is poetic, so what I'm going to do, I will keep my reflection on politics, protest, and poetry very brief. It's a stylistic. Uh, and firstly, what I would do, that I would consider the metaphysics of binary of presence or absence of political poetry, and then explore the nature of poetry in general and protest poetry in particular. My apology. My apology. I've learned from my, like, fellow citizen here in Mumbai and the great literary theorist Homi Bhabha. Last time when we met, we were talking about difficult language and simple language in poetry. So my apology. If the language of my text sounds fragmented and episodic, because for me, language is also an imaginary Freudian couch on which oppressed and victims of just injustices reveal their fears and fantasies. So you can see where I'm coming from. I started my career with Ashish Nandi back home here. Is still my mentor, my friend, and someone who introduced me to Indian poetry scene. So first thing first, poetry is an aporia or riddle or paradox. I repeat, poetry is an aporia or riddle or paradox. Possible, impossible aporia, as Derrida suggests. That is what I learned while fixing, punctured bicycle of Derrida. So for me, poetry is not plain vanilla delight or mere expression of private culinary preferences. It is deeply political and inherently social. Using Lacanian psychoanalytic insight, I also suggest that poets are amphibians and also ambidextrous, speaking in folk tongue, especially in post-colonial settings. In other words, metaphysics of presence or absence of political in poetry creates dualistic oppositions and installs a hierarchy that unfortunately privileges presence before absence or poets over non-poets. Therefore, it is important to reveal and reverse dichotomies in the language, text of poetry, and therefore poets need to become suspicious of truths, including his own, and challenge all forms of patriarchal, sexist, racist lies of their own dwelling as well. This is a little Heideggerian note that I'm using here. Therefore, I'm not surprised that Plato wanted to banish poets from his Republic, because they can make lies seem like truth. Or why Auden, the spiritual physician of his generation, insisted that poetry makes nothing happen. Both were tormented by the paradoxical nature of political in poetry. A word about political here. I must clarify here where I'm coming from. Following Aristotle, I'm using political as a speaking political animal or creature, possessing the rare human capacity of speaking truth to the power that be. So politics Politics in this politics is a specific way of poetic life, the power of bearing and begetting possibilities of vita activa, the life of action and speech, as Hannah Arendt reminds us. In other words, I would suggest Plato considered poets dangerous precisely for this reason of poets uncloseting, uncloseting hidden futures and destabilizing authority of truth, and especially truth of messianic philosophy. They are all over these days, in different parts of the world. And while guarding himself against devil of unauthenticity, false emotions, inflated rhetoric, empty sonorities, Auden also admitted that poetry survives as a way of happening. There are many ways of protest, and multiple ways of protest, including poets performing protest. My friend is here, Navina. I recently read Ravina's wonderful translation of Neelam. So the good news, Neelam Navina has got the High Court bail from Guwahati. So there are multiple ways of protesting, including translation is a protest. I'm sure Sukrita ji will agree with me that translation is also a mode of protest. Resisting or including mimicry and imitation. Every crisis for us is an opportunity for protest and writing protest poems. There are many forms of protest poem these days, including Black Lives Matter poems, Dalit poems, feminist poems, income inequality poems, climate change poems. So no wonder poetry is more crucial than prose. I'm sorry, I'm also a prose writer as academic professor, so I'm kind of shifting, on this Derridian territory. But I'm kind of also victim of, this privileging part of, metaphysics of poetry. So therefore, I articulate and reiterate that poetry is more crucial than prose when it comes to speaking truth to power. That is why Hum Dekhenge became a slogan, a national slogan against, a tyrannical power in the country. I wouldn't say much about it. I hold a job and I need to protect my job too. It's being recorded, so I don't want to get into the trouble. These days, we have become careful at this. Even poetry, ordinary poetry reading can land anywhere in Corona. So, for instance, if you remember Mahmoud Darwish, the national poet of Palestine, and especially his poem, I want to share with you Identity Card. Write down, I'm an Arab, and my identity card is 50,000. I have 8 children, and the ninth will come up in the summer. Will you be angry? So this is kind of protest poetry and being political. So I'm combining both protest poetry and political poetry, looking at the content of political in this. Secondly, also one of my favorite poets from Middle East is Adonis. He's also influenced me in many ways, and he says the word in poetry must transcend its essence. It must swell and include more. So even the protest poetry and political poetry needs to become more and more inclusive rather than regressive. There are all kinds of poets around the world, And Isaac reminded us that when you come to Bosnia, who murdered the people? Poets murdered the people. So we need to be very, very, careful about, making poetry more and more inclusive. And that is why Adonis said in one of his poems, the present is a slaughterhouse and civilization is a nuclear inferno. And who will forget Aga Sahid Ali? I mean, a lockdown is a new experience for us. But ask any Kashmiri, lockdown has been there. I mean, it's like frozen. It's frozen. It's not melting. So the country without a post office in the lockdown forever, And also, I mean, Maya Angelou, Dr. Aya has already spoken about Maya Angelou. So you can think about, there are different forms of what I'm trying to look at, different forms of protest. And finally, I'm coming to, I mean, there is some kind of misconception about English poetry in India that they are not as much political. But I would counter that argument and speak for their political component, including, Arun Kulatkar, K. Patel, Dilip Chitre, Nassim Ezekiel, and especially if you recall Zain Mahapatra, Jaideep is here. His iconic poem Hunger is such a lyric protest against hunger and ravages of poverty. This remains so iconic. although it doesn't scream as much as we would like to believe. So finally, I come to the last part of protest poetry and its engagement. There are hybrid forms, and I've been talking about ambivalence. So, so when in dilemma or self-doubt about the necessity of poetry, and especially protest poetry, I often revert to revolutionary black feminist Audre Lorde, who described herself as black, lesbian, mother, warrior, and poet, and said that poetry is not a luxury, it's a vital necessity of our existence. That is how I look at protest poetry. Poetry, she said, is how we name the nameless. Anyone who is in the power and tyrannical power. It forms the quality of the light within which we predicate our hopes and dreams towards survival and change. That's the kind of protest poetry I'm looking at. In other words, poetry must resist majoritarian tyranny and come out in support of minorities, migrants, dissidents, and oppressed everywhere, not just in one part of the world. That is why poets must be having right, and that is what Neelam faced, recently, when he wrote about a bus, and people protested against his poetry, and almost they could have list him. I don't know. I mean, like I will, get to know more from Navina's, work about, Neelam's controversial poetry journey. So poets must be having a right to be unconventional, maverick, heretic, and also occasionally blasphemous when need be. In short, poets must oppose all forms of cruelty and fears. So poetry, if it doesn't bleed, it doesn't bleed, it leads us nowhere, or else it will become opium of masses or pill-popping existentialism for middle classes and glitterati. So let me conclude with the Lacanian declaration: I'm not a poet, as they can see. I'm not a poet. I'm just quoting Lacan. I'm not a poet, but becoming a poet. Thank you very much. So let me see how I, relate it to my body of works. So first I will go to a very, very old poem, almost 20 years of old poems. You can see there are 3 poems that I have chosen to share with you, including my Flamingo series, one of the Flamingo poems, which I wrote for, lockdown, what is called lockdown poems. Lockdown poems have become a new genre, I believe, hopefully. Yeah. So I will read something about Kunti. It's from my very old, almost 22-year-old poem, and which is in this my collection, Grandfather's Typewriter. And Ashish was very kind to reflect on this poem. So it goes like this. Kunti has always been seen as passive and without any agency in the literature and the dominant myth. So I'm putting a spin here, a post-colonial spin. O Kunti's sons, O Kunti's sons, I smell the blood of an Englishman. I smell the blood of an Englishman. I hear warbles of the mangled dragons. I see colonial queens giving birth to unwanted progenies. Nothing is more divine than the Magna Carta fluttering across sterile continents like pornographic calendar. O Kunti's sons, I still feel the ancient arthritic pain in my knees. I still fear the Maoist bayonets of alien soldiers. I still dance in the acid rains on the foothills of Shivalik. Nothing is more revolutionary than eunuchs destroying all famous men and women. O Kunti's sons, Sanskrit is high scoring, French is fashionable, memory is birthday gift, and land is ultimately a chocolate factory. Yet you fear losing the Berlin Wall. O Kunti's sons, O Kunti's sons. So this is like, a take, a very, kind of my own whimsy take on Kunti and Kunti's myth. There is a poem that I would like to share with you. This is my, and then, cut to 2020 poem. And thank you, Vasudhara, she wanted me to read this Flamingo. Scroll has already published, 5 poems. So I'm reading just 1 poem. And including, Financial Express has also published a Flamingo poem. So this is Flamingos in Early Summer. And shortly, it has been translated also in Indian languages. So I will share with my fellow poets shortly when it comes out in Hindi and Odia. Flamingos in Early Summer. Nobody thought Nobody thought in the terrible days of solitude, herds of jobless migrants with clay brick masks would arrive in the capital city. With them, the Armenian flamingos also descended, flock after flock in the maggoty shadows of early summer. From their sweaty pink wings, dry mustard leaves kept falling in the freshly made shelter homes, flapping their empty stomachs, Slowly, they filled the sky with their hungry, nasal cries for food and water. Infuriated with the smell of infectious blood, affluent city dwellers turned against themselves, speaking with strange voices of stones in their moments of self-survival. Flamingos in early summer. So there is one poem which I've tried to use, after, it's again from the Flamingo series. It's a very short poem. So if I would like to share with you. And this is stylistically, after having written the poem, I realized that, unconsciously I used Pericles' funeral oration. So those who are familiar with the Pericles funeral oration, just look at what has happened during, lockdown, and especially in the coronavirus. It's titled Victorious Virus. It's again part of that series, Flamingo series. Victorious Virus. Where are the men and women? Where are the men and women washing, ironing dirty clothes at the Dhobi Ghat, Bombay Dhobi Ghat? Where are the men and women washing, ironing dirty clothes at the Dhobi Ghat? Where are the daily wagers and prisoners lavishing praise on lawmakers for their miseries? Where are the laborious ants and lazy rabbits slumbering in the holes of solitude? Where are the lovers and traveling souls clearing imported landmines in the streets? Where are the days and nights polishing our shoes for May Day parade? We all must stay in the house. We all must stay in the house. Dark confinement. It's useless to protest. Submit to the funeral speech of the victorious virus. And finally, I guess, I must share, because this is like, Banaras. Sukrita ji, I'm not going to read the whole poem, but I think this is, a day where we need to celebrate protest, and we have, poets lined up to, read better than me and perform better than me in protest poetry. Protest poetry is also a lifeline for a new generation, and we are learning from them. I mean, back in our days in JNU, when, the era I call it, Gorakh Pandey and Dhumil, we also performed in our own ways on the campus. So here is Banaras. I will read a small section from Banaras and then stop. It's just a fragment. Today what I'm trying to present a story in a fragmented way. I mean, I'm not using Partha Chatterjee's, proprietary, rights over, fragments. So let because there is so much intolerance of many kinds, many things. So from the Banaras poem, I'm reading just a small piece, a small fragment. In a fantasy facade of ritual picnicking, left-wing Nagas and right-wing Gosais, the country how it looks like, right-wing and left-wing. So in a fantasy facade of ritual picnicking, left-wing Nagas and right-wing Gosais, who often gambled, played, and relieved themselves in the overflowing dump yard in the narrow lanes of the city, attacked the moments from the memory bazaar. We were told they were jobless migrants. Again, migrants are there. We were told they were jobless migrants. They were carders, spinners, yarn makers, dyers. They were armed with looms, spindles, and 72 extra threads. Rumor said James Prinsep Tavernier and Sri 1008 Dandapani were in the crowd when slaughtering of a mother cow and destruction of Emperor's mosque took place. As soon as radio jockeys Tiwari ji and Daddan Mia announced Mandir Masjid wahi banega, all flamingos. All flamingos, you can see flamingos. All flamingos and dark-skinned slaves fled the city. Puzzled, we saw Brahmins, Sikhs, Dan priests looting pink feathers from designer shops, blood dripping from blood, mostly red, without any past austerities, spilled in opaque dysentery designs all over the mathematical tiles on the perimeter of funeral guards. With canvas wings, severed bodies floated in the air of a trade and blossomed like untimely old Scottish roses. Seeing this, Kabir began to weep. Sadhu, sadhu, ye murdo ka gaon, ye murdo ka gaon. पीर मरे पैगंबर मरी है मर गए जिंदा जोगी राजा मरी है प्रजा मरी है मर गए पैदा रोगी. Keep in mind, this is a village of the dead. The saints have died. Dead are the living mendicants. The ruler is dead. Dead are the ruled. Dead are the physician and the patient. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ashwini. That was really a very, very wide trajectory, starting off with Kunti and, of course, going through all the known iconic theorists of theorists and thinkers and literators and poets, from the well-known even Ashish Nandi to Homi Bhabha, and then on to Plato and Lacan, and then coming towards a realization that poetry is inherently about protest. Something that Sukrita had already pointed out. Jaideep has also supported the view that poetry has to internalize that moment of protest. Otherwise, there is no point even writing poetry, because if it is merely descriptive, it is merely a very complacent narrative rather than an interrogation into our own environment, and also the ability to link the past with the present and also think in terms of the future. And so it's brilliant, the poems you read and also the text that you read out to us. Thank you, Ashwini. And now we go on to Nabina Das. Nabina, I don't know whether you remember, we met at the press club many years ago for a poetry.
Yes, I do.
Where I think most of us got lost because we didn't know which way to reach the press club. And but it was fun to be there. And of course, I got a chance to hear you in person. I've been a great admirer of your poetry. And as many of you know, Nobina is a poet and writer based in Hyderabad. She's a 2017 Sahajapedia UNESCO Fellow, a 2012 Charles Wallace Creative Writing Alumna of Stirling University, and a 2016 Commonwealth Writers Organization feature correspondent. Her third poetry collection, Sanskar Nama, has been mentioned as one of the best poetry books of 2018 by the Open magazine. Congratulations for that, Nabina. Her other publications include poetry collections Into the Migrant City 2013 and Blue Vessel 2012, a novel Footprints in the Bajra 2010, and short fiction volume The House of Twining Roses 2014. She has worked in journalism and media for about 10 years and is the co-editor of 40 Under 40, an anthology of post-globalization poetry published in 2016. She teaches creative writing in universities and independent workshops, trained in Indian classical music, and a former street theater performer. Her other interests are cinema and traveling. So over to Nabina and performance poetry, probably.
Thank you, Sanjukta. Yes, I remember we had met several years ago in Calcutta Press Club, and this was a particular event where I was invited by. I think Joydeep was also there, and then Shurabhi Bhattacharya had invited me, and that's where there was a book launch. But it was really brief, but I think the interaction was electric, and it was really good. And we did quickly exchange few notes about our writings, and Incidentally, even my book got launched there. I think it was all thanks to Asian Signature magazine, which had organized that particular meeting. But yes, I remember, and it's so nice to see you back here, because I've been following you or your work a little bit on Facebook, as far as I can, because of IPPL and my friends who are associated with it, and all those young writers and poets from Kolkata mainly. But I want to also thank Dr. Ibrahim for this wonderful evening, and because of Bashudhara. And Bashudhara is a person I've met only very recently on social media, but they say there's always a connection, when you see somebody, when you meet someone and quickly make a connection. So Bashudhara was one of those people who, I started interacting with on poetry and what to write, what to read, and how we were exchanging work on social media. So it was a great privilege for me that she thought I was fit for this evening on this August panel of to celebrate the International Day of Justice. And I do see some friends who I already met and knew, like Shukrita is here, and that's such a great thing to have her here, because last I saw her in Hyderabad, right, for your book launch. And Ashwini, it's not too long ago meeting in TIS, but yeah, it's wonderful. Ranu, I know we've met long, long ago on some time in JNU, but there is like this whole time space thing happening here. Jaydeep is here, Shaima is here, I can see. But the sudden corona crisis, which has created this little space called lockdown and so-called isolation. And I wanted to say a few things which actually have been very well said already by Shukrita and Jaydeep and Ashwini, who I refer to as Prof. I keep calling him Prof. So all three of you have already said so eloquently about what I might have just touched upon. And yeah, talking about this lockdown and isolation, I don't exactly know who said this, but that usually the idea is that poets are writing poetry is an act of solitary living, solitary being. So, but this poet particularly, she said that it's really not true, and I realize it more now that we are in so-called solitariness. That actually writing is a social act; it's a collective act, and I have started to understand more about this collective act, this non-solitary act. We do write on our own. We do sit in a corner of our own choice, and we don't sometimes want people around us and distraction around us. But it is really not a solitary act of, just putting down some words on the page. So for me, yes, it has come back in a new way. The meanings have erupted in a new way when I think that it is a collective act which needs more and more collective action. And this is what is happening right here. So without theorizing, I can see, all of us here are here on the same platform on a virtual forum, and somewhere we are converging on ideas and modes of protest, or even basic questions like what is poetry, how to write poetry, and how do we reach our voice to the larger collective outside there from our own little spaces. And this is what I had been discussing with some students this morning. And as Ashwini has very correctly pointed out, that the lockdown for us really isn't yet a lockdown so much, where Kashmir has been going through lockdowns, a series of lockdowns for decades. And then it's something that generation after generation of Kashmiris, if you speak to a family, you'll find they have all their stories about different lockdowns. And coming from a particular space of reading, writing, and witnessing cultural and political movements in the Northeast, because I'm from Assam, born and brought up in Guwahati. So for me, it is also very pertinent that all that has seeped into my understanding about what to write and how to give channel to that sort of writing. So I have actually never really embraced the term protest writing or dissent, although I'm currently editing an anthology of dissent, which is to be brought out by Red River, an independent publisher. But I'm sort of thinking about all these terms, that where do we call something protest poetry, political poetry, and is performance always political? Is performance protest? And to what extent? There's like a thin line. I know there is a lot of discussion even among Indian English poets that spoken word poetry is really not at par with poets who write on paper, who publish books. But I think that sort of discussion also starts gaining more ground when we understand what spoken word poetry has done to movements abroad as well. I mean, even today, if we are talking about Black Lives Matter, I mean, a lot of it is also not just sloganeering and cheering and other things that TVs are wanting us to see, but it's also to do with uh, like spontaneity in writing. And this is not the Wordsworthian spontaneity I'm talking about, but how your rage, your anguish, your angst is getting channeled, and you're speaking it. You speak it first, and then you definitely also write, also share. This way, kind of multiply the whole genre of what is known today as protest poetry. And my book, since Karnama, which is the latest one that I published from Red River, I've quoted because we are talking about somewhere Neruda and Aga Shahid Ali. I'd quoted Aga Shahid Ali. I had quoted also Zimborska, one of my like most sort of frontline poets, who I like to call. So Aga Shahid Ali had written in a pastoral, "We shall meet again in Srinagar by the gates of the Villa of Peace, our hands blossoming into fists, till the soldiers return the keys and disappear. Again, we'll enter our last world." And this poem has so many layers to talk about, like the Villa of Peace, and the how and whose hands we are talking about, hands that will blossom as fists of fury or fists of peace, fists of resolution. So, seeing the body being transformed into symbols which play up in this whole plane of, in whole gamut of protest poetry, is also an interesting thing that we learn from Aga Shahid Ali, and not just his ways of writing ghazals. And I think Aga Shahid Ali is much more than just English ghazals. Um, and then I quoted Zimborska also from her poem "The End and the Beginning," which is really one iconic poem, a short one, where she has said, "After every war, someone has to clean up. Things won't straighten themselves up after all." And that is saying things as straight as one could say it, that things will not straighten up, and we have to somewhere um, be more proactive, and especially as people who read, write, teach poetry, talk poetry, and perform poetry. I'm actually not a performance poet, so let me just make it very clear. But while reading, of course, I do understand the spirit of performances somewhere there in all kind of act that we indulge in, when like baul songs of Bengal, which not only talk about metaphysical world, talk about the finiteness of the body and the infiniteness of the world, of the transcendental hopes and symbols. But even when Bob Dylan got his Nobel, there was a lot of hue and cry that he's only a songwriter, but he's somewhere also a verse writer, if I may put it that way. So all of us are somewhere treading this thin line between speaking and writing, performing, and putting ourselves out there, whether in this manner where we are simply virtual beings to each other, connecting through the ether, or in physically out there when you are talking about poems of Gadar in Telangana. Poems of Gadar have, or Ashwini mentioned Gorakh Pandey and Thumil, and we've had Vidrohi. When I was in JNU, Vidrohi used to roam around. Rana would know, right? Used to roam around the streets, and not many, people. Some people thought he was a madman, but his performance, as I realize now, was to be just there, to be present, to walk, come, sit, have a cup of chai, smoke, share a cigarette, which is like doing rounds, and somewhere people like Vidrohi, before that Gorakh Pandey, Dhumil, and everybody else, and Nagarjun, and there are so many other names you can take. And even when you read on the pages of a book, poets like Kamala Das who inspire us, and the very iconic feminist protest voice, which I don't find really another one today. If I'm to look at the scape of Indian writing in English, I'm sure there is, but somewhere I feel all this is in the gamut of sort of presentation in terms of protest, in terms of concern, in terms of questioning. And I think that last point, questioning, for me has always remained very important, because if you have stopped questioning at a certain point, your art, your craft really loses its balance, loses its meaning. So, and also translation, because Nilim Kumar came up when Ashwini mentioned. Nilim Kumar is an Assamese poet who just got slapped some 12 FIRs. I mean, as many as 12 FIRs, and there were numerous threats to him. Saying that he'd be beheaded or something for writing a very simple poem called A Sick City Bus or an Alien City Bus. And it's such a simple poem that no one can miss the message there. But obviously, the ones who are protesting might have been led by some other vested interest to, like that it attacks our home heritage of Assam, which is not the case really. But unless there is a translation, this sort of protest or social commentary, excuse me, creation of awareness, it just doesn't go around. So I think that's why, more and more delving into translations and reading poets across our own Indian English little bubble helps a lot. So I'm sure all of us try to do that, and all of us here are actually drawing inspirations also from those sources, which are not just Indian English poets or English language poets per se, but also poets from different languages and different ethos and different sentiments and different political and historical backgrounds. So so that's why I will not go too much into discussing what is protest and what is not, because I am enthralled by what I've heard already. I'll just read a few poems of mine and try to just tell you why or when they were written. So this particular poem I have been reading almost everywhere recently. Also because, again, other than Nilim Kumar incident, there have been attacks on poets in Assam. These poets, young poets called Mia poets, who've been writing about their own culture, own heritage. And Mia is a word which was all along used as a slur in Assam for Muslims. And every time one has to demean a Muslim person, one would just hurl this word saying, "You're a Mia, you're a Mia. Mias do this, Mias do that." So this was like reclaiming the word Mia back and recreating poems and songs in that dialect, which they called the Mia dialect. And so somewhere I refer to that and refer to a few other things that have been going on in my mind. Wrote this poem called They Are Kissing, and this is after the American poet Dorian Law's Kissing. So I'm going to just read this right now. And Dorian's poem is pretty much like this, but my poem is completely cast in my surrounding, my background, and all the historical, political things that are happening around me. They are kissing. They are kissing at gunpoint. They know they cannot be caught kissing. They are kissing as though the Chinars never saw any bloodshed, only lipstick. Asifa is grown up now. She's kissing her love, and her horses are dancing. The grass is erupting in joy. The valley is rushing in its unviolated grace because they are kissing. They are kissing. They are kissing on a country boat thick over the roaring flood. They're making the char silk turn alabaster under their starry eyes and swoon. They're humming their old Mia songs, calling out their firebirds and coasts, slapping the fish smells onto their tongues, and they are simply kissing. They are kissing because they do not want to become burnt flesh, lynched bodies, severed, mangled limbs, but they want to become one. Junaid, wearing back his bloodied skull cap, is kissing his heartthrob. Ishrat Jahan, pulling down her bullet-riddled kurta, is kissing her Prince Charming in this fairy tale. Lips honey, tongue all roses. They are kissing in faraway Majid Bhita, Imphal, Anantnag, Kandamal, railway platforms, bus stops, parks, chai shops, city streets, your carefully manicured lawns and gated naked neighborhoods. They are kissing before the next pellet gun blinds another school kid, before the next attack maims that dreamy cowherd. The next brutes snatch away the body, the heartbeat, the tears. It's their rage. It's their beautiful longing for a clear sky. It's their hands becoming tree branches. It's their torsos turning summer's fireflies. It's their mouths free to kiss and speak. It's their saliva tasting love's warm rice. They're kissing right now in Unnao, in Khammam, in Kunanpashpora. They are kissing on this page, in between these smudgy words and ink stains, because it is their only rebellion, only region, only map, their only religion. For God's sake, shut your mouth now, for they simply are just kissing.
Excellent. Excellent.
Thank you. That last bit will remind you of Tagore, if you from Shishir Kavita, for God's sake, you know, shut your mouth and let me love. So
Yeah.
I kind of stole that bit thinking, why not? Because Tagore, as much as he was a lyrical poet, he is definitely also a poet of protests and concerns and questioning. I mean, he has posited certain questions for us, which we are still trying to sort out, solve. The question of the nation state and of allegiance to a particular government, and how to really talk with borders. And since we are almost sometimes feeling borderless in this kind of a setup, I still feel that the reality out there is so stark and so brutal that for us to read poetry would be actually an easy thing to do. But to take poetry to people, that's probably the next level in which we have to engage. I mean, with all kind of threats looming around us, COVID for the largest one right now. But I think, speaking of the pandemic, I also feel there are other kind of pandemics which are not medical pandemic have been around us. Hunger has been around us. Poverty has been around us. We have had homelessness. We've had, like the child abuse or women's conditions. These are a pandemic that have been eh, all over the globe, and somewhere less, somewhere more. And suddenly, we are talking about a virus, which is, of course, very frightening for all of us. But at the same time, I think we need to turn our gaze towards, since we are talking about migrants, since we are talking about the workers, we are talking about women languishing, and the poets like Varavara Rao languishing in jail and then landing up in a hospital being COVID positive. So there are greater pandemics that have been surrounding us all the time. And I think this is the time we need to focus, train our gaze, and yes, make an effort in any which way. This is one of these efforts which I believe I am in today. So let me read you a poem from Sanskarnama. This is the title poem. In this land, dreams invite slaughter. I can see how we can meet in the city of hearts. But we walk like Atwood's women, all draped, face shut, blank eyes digging holes in the stark ground. What does a color mean for us? What warmth it brings, I wonder. The skin of our wishes blue, the eyes always mint coin flicker, hands ashen. A woman's body is not scripture, hence shades are brighter here. It's about desires, demands, and blood-red hearts that arteries want. No giving up to fake lines. How can we not see? One by one, the bodies stir in light. Up, up, and about they go. All about the go and see the girdle strip off. Breasts become waves. The women take off their underwear. It's time for a dip in the senses. Bystanders aim their lenses. Henchmen train their whiplashes. The fearful think witches have come. In this land, praises are only for goddesses, sanskar only for the pious. No scope for flesh to speak, no sidelining that defining rekha the poor boy Lakshman drew. So let's fold up the saffron janaeus and let the rivers be open to only gurgles where you hear women rushing out, women with thighs slapping against the root tide, women who bite the poison ivy to spit honey onto the air, women being women, for they don't have to be rule bred, nothing sacred, no ties at all. Then 1,000 years pass by, our arteries throb. In this scripture, the women rewrite the lines and the shlokas. So the writing, Sanskar Nama, and this title poem, the idea behind it was, again, of course, I'm talking about women and how women have been visualized down centuries, and especially because I sort of, my poetry dwells on bodies and spaces and how the two interact. And here I wanted to look at also bodies as scripture. I mean, should it at all be called a scripture or not? And are we talking about rewriting a certain, when people are saying Ram was born in Nepal and Ram was not born in India, we are sort of kind of roaming around in the same diction, in the same textual discussion, but at the same time, I think it just allows us also to tell stories in different modes, in different versions. And so here too, I mean, I wanted to talk about women as a, not just seen as bodies which are useful, but women who exist because they are women and because they themselves will, conduct their shloks and their chants and make this body a scripture or not. So that was the whole idea. And so I'll continue reading from Siskarnama, and if there is any question, of course, I'm ready to answer. This is a poem which I actually read mostly among my students and college workshops because they like to hear it, and it's a short poem. It's called My Neighbor is a Gaurakshak. And because Gaurakshak also entered our dictionary pretty, with great aplomb, because all of us were using it for different purposes. Some with the Gaurakshak side was using it to justify it as one of the most sacred duties on earth, and some of us who are on this side, we would think of the whole idea of Gaurakshaks as being nothing but a vigilante culture, and something that again, as women and bodies and women with histories behind us. Now, how are we to encounter that? Because we are the first sufferers of any sort of vigilantism. My neighbor is a Gorakshak. Everyone has a Gorakshak neighbor these days. Not everyone knows what they look like. We say, Happy Diwali, Sirji, and how's the weather today? We eat cake. Madam ji makes sharbat when we meet. I could even have a lover who's a Gorakshak so tender that he keeps me from all untowardness of nights. Our Gorakshak neighbor wears branded jeans. He hates Chinese goods but flaunts a Swiss watch. She too likes kitty parties where Ramdev Churan churns. Zara scarves with Kolhapuri sandals for the ladies, kyunki, after all, Musalmano mein hunar to hai hi na, for craft and art. Thus, my Gorakshak friends make light of life. When we meet, we say pleasantries like the rain until my inshallah waterlogs their ears. They seem stunned. You Jainiwalas are like that only, na? Somewhat misfit, a little wanton, a little awara. Still, I recite bhakti poetry and often placate the bhakts. Our Gorakshak neighbor of earth, Hindu khatre mein hai. The sky is saffron. The cow mothers turn plastic bags to manna. Our conversations span all greatness of Bharat Mata Shri. Then Nirvana becomes a Bengali mithai. He offers me with tea.
Wow.
So, so this book was written actually in this record speed of 6 months, which is not a great idea. And but I needed to talk about what was happening and what was happening around us. Oh, in there's such furious spate of events. There were killings, there were lynchings, there were There were all kind of things. Syllabus would change, and people would be insulted because of the name and religion, particular food habits. People would disappear. People would simply be taken for granted for being the other. And without going into even theories of other, I think all of us have seen how this othering happens in this vast country where we pride ourselves as multicultural on pluralism. We talk about religion itself being not just one but Ishwar Allah Tero Naam, but it has completely degenerated into some uh, uh, a very scary sort of atmosphere, and that's why I describe my women as Atwood's women. Whereas I have my own critique for Atwood's book, but where still through that book, The Handmaid's Tale, you could see how women have been reduced to almost nothing. And if this is the case, then where would other people go? And talking about poetry reaching out to minorities, to the marginalized, and to those spaces, Dalit spaces, tribal Adivasi spaces, and intersectional spaces, LGBTQ spaces, and how do we make poetry travel to those different spaces, and how do we connect it together for the larger good? Because if we don't do it now, I'm sure very soon so many things are changing, and we won't have even time uh, for a webinar maybe someday. So I'm going to read Reasons for Existing. Again, it's based on a very concrete event that took place in JNU. Reasons for existing. Just because we have rains, our tears don't stop. Just because there's sunset, blood doesn't get dusted. From door to door, there are X marks. Someone is missing. And like the story of Ali Baba, we try to find out where his last expression left its damp print. Just because there's a door doesn't mean he left willingly. His footprints were not seen. A pen lay on the table where that last scribble of "I'm well" flutter in absent-minded breeze. Just because there's a night, that darkness doesn't go to day. In the bustle of the evening, chai cups cluttering at Ganga Dhaba, half-drawn cigarette butts are being lit before they die again and get tossed. Students are discussing borders and bands. Lovers are seeking each other before dawn. Only one name is missing in the twilight. Just because there's oblivion, our memory cannot go to fallen leaves. A mother whispering, Najib, mera beta. A friend raising her fist to his name. The four walls remembering his shadow, shoes, bookshelves, and the clock's tick. A calendar watching over a lost name. I can read couple others, a couple more poems.
Yeah, maybe a couple of others within the next 5 minutes.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So since we were talking about history, memory, and also, the political movements that have surrounded us, I belong to to parents who are of the partition generation. And while they were very young, they have still witnessed a lot of horror, a lot of brutality during partition on both sides. So there are like a wealth of stories which already have been chronicled in so many volumes by writers like Urvashi Batalia, and I also have Rakshanda Jalil, who also uh, edited a volume where I have actually put out my translation sorry, a story. So this poem I'm reading for that generation, my parents who fought for a certain ideal, but I feel somehow the notion of country, notion of belonging has always eluded them. It's called No Country, No Names. The young girl in a sari was off to the library, her hands clasping books. She didn't see the truck crawl up behind her, stuffed with soldiers wearing leafy helmets, false implants in the heart of that shell-shocked, macadamized Bengal town. Her face, a sorry storybook, quite a few pages torn, when they found her by a garbage dump, stared at by the ancient panhandler. The poor bastard refused arrest, shouted abuses, got suitably thrashed by the police. A young man had whispered the night before, "Show me your palm." the red henna peacock from the evening's merry festivities, and she read him a poem about crocodile and snare until they fell asleep in each other's arms, dreaming there was a river, grass, and flowers shrouding its banks, its depths unknown but easy for the rebels who could swim the same night. Yahya Khan made quick plans to strike universities where students danced to the songs of Tagore. That was a night when nervous silence screamed on and on. His would-be bride was picked up and thrown, folding up maps that fooled, didn't show a country of hearts. He left, a peacock mourned for her and him. No country yet for them, no country yet for them.
Very good.
Thank you.
Very powerful.
Thank you so much. I'll conclude with this poem and I'll not speak about it. I'll let the poem speak. It's called Come Aita. Aita means grandmother in Assamese. Come Aita, it's been long. We must discuss. We want radishes in this year's garden. Green gourds climbing a common fence. Sure, you can have some. Also coriander to sprinkle on the pitika for a late afternoon meal. Bhoot jolokia that no one will eat. The army fancies it now, we know. The newspapers have it all. The tea shops get their fortunes told. Come, Aita, let's talk about the pigs and the calves born this year. The ducks that won't stop chasing the hens even if you yell. About the corner shop Bipin? I'm not sure, Aita. Whose ma died crying for he was gone in the forest, they say, to become an insurgent. But the mother said, to find the old dog Gela of the mangy coat. To those stories, Aita, my answers are slippery feet on oil. Come, Aita, let's walk down the paddy lanes just till the town bus stand. You wait for Aunt Moromi. I can tell you why Aslam won't sell fish cheap, even if you swear on the hungry mouth floods, forsaken huts, and fungal pots pans we won't ever throw away. And if you wonder why the one-eyed Hare Krishna didn't return from the big market of Ganesh Guri, no ID, no whereabouts, Aita, I swear on my loveless luck, I'd have to invent a new fairy tale. But come, Aita, let's talk about it all. Thank you.
Brilliant. Yeah.
Thank you. So I think I'll let it be here and not speak much about the poems, and they should speak for themselves. Where I would love to hear other poets in the panel before time runs out. Thank you again, Sanjukta and
Thank
Dr.
you.
Ibrahim Bushdhara.
You have really covered again a very wide trajectory. And of course, you also use the term protest poetry. And probably we are now looking at a subgenre of protest poetry, which is developing in a very big way in Indian English poetry, which was not very common. And so I'm delighted that we are being able to come together in a platform. We have stretched the time much more than 4 to 6. And if a poetry fest goes on beyond the designated hour, it means that it is a success. It's not like the World Economic Forum, which ends right on time. Yes. So I'm very delighted that I have been part of this wonderful experience with poems like My Neighbor is a Gorakshak, and a poem which says that Nirvana became a Bengali mithai. So thank you, Navina. And now we go on to Ranu Unial. She is very well known as a poet and a professor of English at Lucknow University. And I've met Ranu several times at various seminars, and we have found out that we are addicted to something that the poets might even want to write about, which I don't want Ashwini to really grab. That is our common addiction, retail therapy. So I am very pleased to introduce Ranu Unial as professor. She's a professor of English at Lucknow University. Her poetry has appeared in Cha-An Asian Literary Journal, Asia Literary Review, Hong Kong, Mascara Literary Review, Australia, Jaggery, Medulla Review, Sketchbook, among other places. She has published 3 poetry collections, Across the Divide, published in 2006, December Poems 2012, and the most recent, The Day We Went Strawberry Picking in Scarborough 2018. Her poems have been translated into Hindi, Malayalam, Urdu, and Uzbek. She is also a founding member of PASM, a daycare center for people with special needs in Lucknow. Ranu Unil, over to you.
Hello, good evening. It's such a pleasure meeting all of you here on one platform. Jaydeep, Sanyukta Di, and Ashwani Kumar. I'm meeting him for the first time. Nabina, Sukrita ji. It's lovely meeting all of you. And I must congratulate and convey my thanks to the organizers for having arranged this wonderful reading. There is Dr. Yahya Ibrahim and Vasudhara, who deserve special mention. I've been listening to all the speakers, all the poets. They have done a wonderful job. You know, I still remember how in school we often had debate on this particular topic. Is pen mightier than the sword? The power of pen, I would say, lies in its words, and words have several functions. They give us the tool to raise our voice, and they give us, they empower us. They often enlighten us, but they can also destroy us. Therefore, that's why our elders say to us that whenever you use words, you should use words scrupulously. Because ek shabd aushad kare, ek shabd kare ghaav re. Poetry is the breeze that helps us breathe. It's the fire that keeps us alive. Women poets and poets across the country, I would say, they advocate for gender equality and the rights of the disabled, the oppressed, and the poor. And hence, poetry is certainly all about protest. Because when we talk of poetry, we also refer to the minorities, to those who have been victims of human rights abuse and whatnot. There have been poets like Subhadra Kumari Chauhan, Dinkar, Nagarjun, who raised their voice of protest. And it was Dinkar who said it very poignantly that जिन प्रश्नों के उत्तर पहले कभी नहीं मिले, उनका मिलना आज भी मुहाल है. It's very difficult to find answers to those questions. But when it comes to Indian writing in English, and especially Indian poetry in English, the choice of language is always under speculation. We find that no one would have ever asked Mahadevi Varma or Nagarjun why they wrote in Hindi. But Indian poets writing in English have often faced the challenge of writing in a language which they say does not belong to them. Meena Alexander once in one of her poems, Question Time, she raised a question, and that is, what use is poetry? Standing apart, she says, we have poetry so we do not die of history. Poetry is very important. It helps us move beyond differences, move towards and not away from the other. And therefore, all truth must therefore not end with a full stop. There has to be space for commas and hyphens. We must make provision for all. And in times of distress, it is poetry that is likely to stir imagination. A lot has been said already, and we are running short of time. So I think I'll just read some of my poems. I'll first take this poem from my first collection, and I'll be reading the title poem, Across the Divide. And I'm very happy to say that, this particular poem was selected by Kamla Das way back in 1990s when she was the editor of Femina. So this one was published on the poetry page of Femina, and she was the editor. Across the Divide. When you write, you write out of a multiple identity, because our background is a part of us, and which is something which is to be not to be denied or forsaken. Across the divide. I know I am a foreigner in this country, yet how swiftly I unlearned Namaste and wheeled in high. That cool ambience with which I ignore those I wish not to exchange words with. You just walk by with an indifferent air. My long legs in black ripped tights spread easily over cans of lager. Fuck you and piss off. Two distinct jewels. I wear them like silver rings on my toes. Men are all bastards, Maria claims, adds Mary, unless they prove otherwise. How strange it is that her Sam prefers the tangas and not the usual ones. What a swine is the German, you know, he dished well after squeezing her dry for a term. I sigh. Anything is possible in this country. Each evening, we sit and paint our nails in different shades. I speak of the three sisters from my old lost town who burnt themselves to death. It is said the father could not afford their dowry and husbands cost a packet. I speculate in words and figures the amount my parents can afford. He would have to be a Garhwali Brahmin, not a Kayast, nor a Thakur, certainly not a Gora or a Paki. An arranged match, a fixed dowry, a stove explosion, a suicide pact, horoscopes matter. They sigh. Anything is possible in your country. Thank you. The second poem that I'm going to read is, the title of it is The Taste of Tongue. The Taste of Tongue. Will you please mute yourself? This tongue of yours is tart and pickle. Have you not an iota of molasses that stick like a gum and erode the sourish taste of tamarind forever? I am no doubt the taste of tamarind. My Himalayan blood survived your Aryan sting, eroded the taste of molasses, knowing it was lethal. She had seen her mother confront those wicked troops, face inert, eyes glued to the weapons hidden inside their lighted bellies. They came and burnt their mud huts, took away their sacks full of paddy, emptied their bowls of toddy, and filled them up with the waste from their bladder, shot them all one after the other. Brother, husband, neighbor's son, and the distant cousin from Libya, seeking employment in these terrible times, not knowing he will end up dying a man without a shirt. Today, his mother too does not know he has left this earth without a burial. It is the hungry wolves who stepped out in rage and tore his flesh before the feast. Today, she shares with me is what she saw when she was 9 or maybe 11. My mother, ageless, with all her strokes, asked me to fear no man, taught me to keep the size of chapatis small and crisp, serve them with chutney. Let there be enough for all. Be a good host. No one should walk out hungry from this earth. Atiti Devo Bhav. Guest is our Lord. Some guests overstayed, ransacked our homes, entered dreams, consumed our nights, and left us dry. They searched for sweetness everywhere. She opened her skirts and showed us where she stored all that honey and how it turned rancid, but she held on to it. They came again and sucked all the honey, the color of gold, even from our bones. They came again and tore our alphabets and beat us when we sang our mother's lullaby. They came again and grasped our pens and made us write that we will burn in hell, pelted with stones, circled in fire, unless we seek repentance for our sins. Our lost souls will wreathe in cycles of despair. Ovaries gone, ruptured cervix, broken tongue, lost scripts, raised rituals, curses nailed as oblique breasts. Our unwholesome seeds will never bloom. Only daughters survive. Now we are left with the taste of tamarind, tart, and pickle. Thank you.
Brilliant.
One last poem that I will read. The title of it is I'm Game, and this is from my collection, December Poems. Often, it is an embarrassment, this irresistible longing. I stand empty-handed, a modern savage with an everlasting madness. They took away all that I could have offered to you. Days dripping with happiness and nights in proud possession of love. Dreams played in plenty, and there was no dearth of hope. Heart content, as always, waited, not wanting to disturb a promise that clutched nothing but you. Often have I tried to hide the secret. It gushes out like a lonely woman anxious for company. I often see tilting hands as if a mere touch of lust is what I'm looking for. So foolish are men, and so little they know of women. Quickly I trace my steps, a modern savage with an everlasting madness, back in its place, that worn-out sign, do not disturb. I set it free, my caged smile, and chuckle with relief. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranu. That was brilliant and extremely well read. And of course, your reflections on protest poetry, saying that, well, there is nothing other than protest poetry, is also very intriguing, especially because, and in terms of thinking of all the issues that we have talked about, which Navina talked about, the more topical issues from Gorakshak to the poet Varavara Rao, who is now in hospital, and also Nilina Kumar. And the very fact that we are noticing these particular subjects and making and feeling a sense of unrest till these become our concerns born on the page in a poetic form. And that is so important, and especially in your poems and Navina's poems, even you address the gender question, which is also very necessary in terms of understanding of a different sort of pandemic, which is not only time-bound. I'm hoping this particular pandemic is not going to stretch, say, more than the next few months. But the other one, which Navina hinted at, and you also referred to, is one, I don't know how many centuries more we will require to be able to really come out of it, but hopefully there will be a time. And so now we go on to Saima Afrin, who has been also a member of our, are you there, Saima? I can't see you. And she was there a little while back, but I know Hyderabad is a little far away from Lucknow. She will take a time, but I'm sure.
No, Saima was here. I saw her.
Yeah, I saw her.
Yeah, she's just here and there.
I'll just give her a call. I'll just give her a call, ma'am. You can go ahead and introduce her.
Yeah,
Saima,
they have a small proposal, why don't you ask Saradeep or Sukrita ji to read small poems, like fill in. by the time Sama comes in.
No, I think I
Or you read, or you read
Saima is
something.
there. I
or
think
it's-
she has to unmute herself.
Sanjukta ma'am, law points are also due.
Oh,
Or
okay, but
you read something, Didi. I guess you will
no,
you will enjoy
Sanjukta, you
that.
can read your poems. Please read your
Read your poem. I
Please,
guess you
one-
Sanjukta ma'am, you have to read.
Sanjukta, Saima has to unmute
oh,
herself.
she said, yeah, she said I'm here.
Okay, done.
Yeah. Saima, poetry is about voice and vision.
Has to be heard.
Yeah.
She has to unmute yourself.
And Sukrita started off by saying connect. The moment you said connect, I first thought, is it Ian Foster you're thinking about or Microsoft? And but then your connect was deeply philosophical.
Saima, there will be a red microphone button at the bottom of your screen. So when you press on your picture, you will see there are two buttons. One is a
Yeah.
video shaped button, one is a microphone shaped button. That is turned red now. You click on it and you will be able to unmute yourself.
Saima was sitting so quietly. I am not able to, she's saying. Please help her.
Could you, Saima? Could you unmute?
I think the administrator could probably unmute her.
No, ma'am. Actually, we can mute people, but we cannot unmute them.
Oh, okay.
She has left the meeting, it
So
says.
they have to unmute themselves.
No.
No, probably
Wait,
she's going to call somebody.
That is why I said just wait. Poetry is about waiting and happening.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, this is so poetic. I mean, like it rarely happens, because remember pre-COVID, Jaideep and Sukrita, they were rushing to festival after festival hopping. I'm very happy,
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm in a waiting.
Simon is back.
I'm waiting and I'm enjoying that.
Unmute.
Yes, we can see Saima. She has unmuted herself.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Saima Afreen is an award-winning poet who also works as deputy city editor with the New Indian Express. Her poems have appeared in several Indian and international journals, including Indian Literature, HCE Review, Barely South Review, the Bellingham Review, the Roanco Review, the Stillwater Review, the McNessy Review, the Nassau Review, the Oklahoma Review, Stag Hill Literary Journal, the Notre Dame Review, Honest Ulsterman, and Exister, among others. She received Writer of the Year Award 2016 from Nassau Community College, the State University of New York. She has been part of several literary festivals and platforms such as Sahitya Academy Poets Meet, Goa Arts and Literary Festival, TEDx VNR Visit, Prakriti Poetry Festival Hyderabad, Literary Festival, Betty June Siliconas Poetry Festival, Helsinki Poetry Jam, Pulse Radio Glasgow, the University of Stirling, the University of Westminster, Waterstones Bookstore Canterbury, and the University of Kent. We can understand why you took a little time. In the autumn of 2017, she was awarded the Villa Sarkia Writers Residency, Finland, where she completed the manuscript of Sin of Semantics. This is her debut poetry collection. She's been awarded the Charles Wallace India Trust Fellowship 2019 in creative writing at the University of Kent, United Kingdom. Over to Saima Afreen. Please read your Saima Afreen. Please read your poems.
Thank you so much, Sanjukta Di, and thank you so much, Kareem City College, for the invitation. And my apologies for the goof up that just happened with the mic. And a lot has already been said about the protest poetry, writing, and the community of writers and poets in the country. So I'll talk a little bit about the protest poetry. I was interviewing Mangalesh Dabralji, the wonderful contemporary poet. And I asked him that, does poetry bring revolution? He said, poetry does something more important. It dreams of revolution. And that line has stayed with me. It's not for nothing that once when Agha Shahid Ali reached at a certain airport and he was asked, are you carrying anything dangerous? And he says, yes, my heart. And when we look back at the history of our country and elsewhere in the world, poetry has always given the slogan. Here we have Faiz है बद फैज, बोल के लब आजाद हैं, बोल के ज़बां अब तक तेरी है. Or Pash, for instance, who said, मैंने लोहा खाया है, मैं घास हूँ, मैं फिर उगाऊंगा. And this reminds me of the arrest of Safura Zargar, who was pregnant, and she is activist and student of Jamia, and she was arrested. She has been released on June 23rd, and she suffered a lot. But the police said that she was a co-conspirator in commissioning of serious offense in Delhi and elsewhere in the country. So that takes me back to Kashmir, which has been suffering for decades, and their lockdown began in the month of August the last year. So I would like to present a poem for a child of Kashmir, which talks about an unborn child and how the unborn child is witnessing the entire drama unfolding without being born. For a child of Kashmir. Child, look, a little paper boat sways on the violet waters of butchered lullabies, one which your mother once put a tear of your dreams and a firefly from her face. Bullets pierce the mouth of the molten moon. Your small universe weeps in your tiny palms, stained with white blood. Child, do not alone. Tonight it will be cremated by wolves in khaki, guards of peace. The thud of their boots tramples upon the veils, coming from the red carpet of fresh blood on streets. The night preening its blue plumes drips as broken sounds from the rows of poplars, silent spectres of doom. Child, do not cry. Your beheaded doll will find a grave amid dark pits of deadly shrieks left unburied. Child, hold tightly the velvety wings of a crushed butterfly, even if you see blades of green grass growing out of smashed skulls. Listen, the ghosts of smoke have just sung songs of spring blooming as bleeding hearts from the burnt flowers of Nishad Bagh. Child, you will not get a bouquet of colors in this land anymore, not even in the fractured fingers of your crayons. Behold, child, gray, black, red are the only colors left in Kashmir. Forget the orange of your candy. The brutal blue night will soon remove all hues except red. The devil in the chart tries to erase the verses written on white wings of the wind, with his fingers smeared with ashes of charred bodies that burnt upon the charcoal of mornings. Fire, the serpentine tongue swallows the glittering pictures of fairies and dwarfs in your storybooks. Tiny sparks hiss on needles of rain. Child, go, the inferno engulfs the morning star that trembles on the liquid glass of your iris. Cover your pink ears, fables, rhymes, claps are drops of molten lead. Stories of blood and gore flutter as bats, licking flowers on the wallpaper of your skin. Strange hands throw the wounded scarlet sun in the black lake, where laughter was slaughtered. Even the eye of prophecy is lost in distorted map. See, child, forest suns try to mend the shawl of the torn sky that your mother covered herself with. Dirty scraps of blue cloth fall on catacombs beneath chinar trees. Child, tell me, will the world ever come to know what it means to breathe inside a dead womb? I will read two more poems because we are short of time, and the poem I'm going to read is in Hindustani. This poem is dedicated to the women of Shaheen Bagh who a couple of months ago were protesting. But thanks to the pandemic, the government got a chance to get them removed. But we'll have to see will the voice of the protest be silenced. शाहीन बाग की औरतों के नाम रात एक बर्फ की सलीब है ये उन औरतों की आंखों में कोहरा बनकर उतरती है जो शीरखार बच्चों को सीने से लिपटाए हुए चिमटाए हुए अपनी उंगलियों से उस आसमान को हिलाती है जहां शायद खुदा सो रहा है, या शायद हर एक दिल में उस नौजायद बच्चे की तरह रो रहा है, उन गलियों में, उन सड़कों पे जहां सब कुछ धुआं धुआं है, मकानों से खून उबलता है और मकीनों के जिस्म जलते हैं, किताबों से तारीख को दिल्ली में बैठा दीमक चाट रहा है, दिलों को, जमीनों को, मकीनों को खुदा के नाम पर बांट रहा है और भूल बैठा है कि हर एक दिल में बैठा बुत वही खुदा है जिसकी परछाई मैं भी हूं, तुम भी हो, तुम भी हो और वो भी है। वो एक नमरूद जो खुदा बन बैठा है, वो रियाया की रगों में जहर घोल रहा है, हजारों बरस की इस जमी को टुकड़ों में तोड़ रहा है, मगर इसी नगर में जहां सड़कों पे आग के दरिया रवा है, जिस्म जिंदा है, जहां ज़बां पे शबनम झुलसती है और सांसों में कुहास होता है, वो चादरों में लिपटी औरतें अपने लहू में वजू करती हैं, कोहरे में लिपटे बच्चों के लिए आसानियों का सामा करती हैं। अगले पहर गर देर तक रोशनी हो, समझना सूरज इनके ही दामन में तुलु हुआ होगा। ये कौन है ये तुम जान लेना, एक किरण इनसे तुम भी मांग लेना।
Wow, very good.
Thank you so much. So I'll read one more last poem, and that is related to migrant workers. Being a journalist, we keep talking to the people around. And recently, one of the fellow reporters from the district reported that a family who had come from Bihar, it was actually eating mud to survive 15 days till one of the NGO came to their rescue. They were brought back to the city and they were offered food and shelter. So I come across a lot of these vegetable vendors, a lot of maids, rickshaw wallahs, etc. Like Ashwini Bhai wrote in one of the articles in the Hindu, these are invisible citizens. And there is not much that is being done. There is a Regulation of Employment and Conditions of Service Act 1979, which fails to address and incorporate the welfare rights of these migrant laborers, for whom home is everywhere and everywhere it is not. So this particular poem is about rickshaw puller of Calcutta. Calcutta is my home. It's been 6 years since I have been living in Hyderabad. And I was born in Gaya, Bihar, by the way, where my father was posted as station superintendent. So a lot of these rickshaw pullers, they come from UP and Bihar, and they bear the brunt of the poverty, of hunger, and of unemployment. And there are better ways of transport of commission. Sanjita must be knowing this. So here it is, the rickshaw puller of Calcutta. Sunset was never his home. He lives in his two hands. 2 feet. The wooden vehicle is his soul. Its handles whip the thick dust. In the arteries of Newmarket, flushing streamers of Christmas trees and soft jingle. On the silver screen of New Empire Cinema Hall. His skin and bones were shown there once, in Do Bigha Zameen. It doesn't matter to me how he maps years every day, paddling through the monsoon gurgles of Ripon Street, Bada Bazaar. Past a fat cussing woman who tosses a 5 rupee coin in the gutter of his soul. The stink of a chili, a tiny onion, a handful of peanuts. He leaves the maps of villages in Bihar and cements the cracks in his fate. Silent, neutral, unmoved, the haze of green styles him. The flush of red on Calcutta Corporation buildings leaks from his feet. He runs, streets flash past his blood. Tea shops zoom in with the china, a masthead flattens his picture, muddled, wrinkled. His face was always a lantern for lonesome passengers. They bury his story in a 2-inch column. The dawn wakes up to the lost song of a brass bell in bony palms, now pinned to coal stars, dripping on a Wasim Kapoor canvas. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Saima. Those were very important protest poems, if we can call them those, because they are so immediate and we can relate to them in a way which unnerves us a little, especially because you have covered, say, the child of Kashmir, the women of Shaheen Bagh, and then the rickshaw puller in Kolkata as a migrant worker. And this rickshaw puller is so different from Dominique Lepierre's rickshaw puller in the City of Joy. So I'm delighted to have been given this opportunity of being a part of this brilliant panel of extremely talented poets from all over India. And of course, we also found out that Hyderabad is the farthest of the lot, but it's been a learning experience. And Vasudhara, can I?
Where is Vasudhara? She's not saying.
Hello, hello, ma'am. Since China has set the tone of a bit of Urdu poetry also, and we are hearing to these. Yes, sir.
एक सुनाई दे, एक सुनाई या साहब आप भी सुनाए ना. We haven't heard anything from Karim College.
So it is time to.
Yes, sir. From the participant request, it's a Thanksgiving request.
Yeah. It is time to listen to our.
We are going away, but we are asking for a gift from them. And the gift will be a poem, I guess.
Yes, sir. Yes.
And Urdu poem will be the most befitting gift,
Yes, I'm not. I'm just quoting two shades from someone else's poetry.
Yes,
and then
please.
and with these two shades, with these two couplets, I would like to invite our chairperson, ma'am, for her poetry. कानून से हमारी वफा दो तरह की है. कानून से हमारी वफा दो तरह की है. इंसाफ दो तरह का, सजा दो तरह की है. एक छत पे तेज धूप, एक छत पे बारिशें. एक छत पे तेज धूप, एक छत पे बारिशें. क्या कहिए कि आसमां में घटा दो तरह की है. Humbly and very humbly, our chairperson, ma'am, to take the dice and share her poems also. Please, ma'am.
We are running very late, so I'll just read two poems.
Yeah.
One is Walking Home is the first poem. Suddenly, thousands and thousands of them became homeless. Who asked the migrant workers to return to their native places? Did they walk out or did they have to walk out? No one knows. No one asks. No work. Their on-site homes had to be emptied at once. Wow. No electricity, no water, no food, no money. The attention men at work signboards lay in the dust. The many men, many women, many children just walked down roads and highways. All transport stood like statues as they walked past the buses, trucks, trains. No one asked them to stay at home during lockdown. They were turned out of their makeshift homes as they could not work from home. Those who stayed indoors during the lockdown walked on treadmills, jogged on balconies, saw pristine river waters flowing effluent free, bird calls, peacocks on highways, a racing deer, green grass, green trees, blue skies, sighting of the snowy peaks and the sound of relative silence. Bonding with family, playing with children, watching television, movies, web series, video games, rarely books. Many spoke of kitchen work, gym at home, yoga and aerobics, and the routine sport of violent domestic spat. While outside their sliding glass windows, Outside their air-conditioned homes, the specter of hunger stalked the jobless workers walking home. Half-fed, unfed, sizzled by the fury of the tropical summer, they are still walking towards the shelter called home. This free shelter called home is their only refuge. Their tired footsteps echoed like drum beats in the heart. Their vacant, hurt eyes, parched lips ask, "My Lord, are we citizens or are we refugees in our own country?"
Wow, wow. Yeah, but lovely.
This is one, and another one is titled A Skewed World. The title was knocked out by the Statesman when they published it last Sunday. So,
Simon, make sure that she is editing.
I'm going to office in some time, so I'll come into my figure.
what is Skewed World? So I'll read it. When you say you love me, I feel you must have found out my bank account balance.
Yeah.
When you say everything is all right, I'm sure something is wrong everywhere. When you say we are the best, I can sense we are going downhill. When you say we will conquer space, I know we are cramped for space in our hearts and homes. When the virus rages, we just compete with death counts. I know then nothing is under control. When you say our callous cavalier stances have created hotspots and containment zones, I know that there are not enough ventilators. When you say relax, we have reached the plateau, I know it is now the silence of the wasteland. It is now only sighs from graveyards. Yet hope rises in the doleful air, unfurling its wings of assurance. Just don't say anything anymore. Let silence heal. Let hope speak in its resonant, wordless, gentle voice. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Lovely.
Yeah. So maybe Vasudhara will come on. Yes, there you are. You should be doing the wrapping up.
Yes. Yes, ma'am. So
We have a request to
Like-
Vasudhara to read one of her poems. She
Yes,
has a
that would be wonderful.
wonderful poem.
Some other day, some other day, some other day, surely. Surely some other day. It's we are already running late, and I feel very very grateful. Like, if there are two things I want to say, one thing is, obviously I have been a participant in this entire session, and as a participant, it was so enriching that I tremble to think that we were also part of the organizing team, and therefore, our gratitude to all of you is immeasurable, really immeasurable. Because one thing that we see about poetry, I personally feel about poetry is this: that poetry is ubiquitous. It is everywhere. Everywhere there are children lisping poetry, and there are people reading poems, and they're talking about poems. And yet, when we look at poetry as a literary form, we fear that it's a highly marginalized form. It's a form that people, and particularly as teachers in the classroom, we realize that students don't take to it very easily. And even there are people who will ask me, you write poems, why don't you write a book? As if a book cannot be a book of poems, and there is a kind of dichotomy there. So why don't you write a book? And when I tell them, I try to tell them that I write poems, and they say that, oh, you write poems. So poems are something which are very easily dismissed. And I have been pondering on, why is poetry so easily dismissed? And I have come to the conclusion that probably because you cannot communicate anything about poetry without having people read them. So you can communicate, a prose work, you can just tell them the digest of an essay, you can give them the summary of a novel, you can tell them, something about a short story, and, it will be communicated by way of mouth that, okay, so and so short story or so and so novel has such and such to say. However, you cannot communicate the essence of a poem without having them read the poem. So you have to repeatedly tell them that you read so and so writer, you read so and so poem. And this is something which people never do. Reading is automatically close reading when it comes to poetry, and many readers are not willing to invest and engage themselves with poetry to that extent. And this is perhaps where we fail, and this is perhaps where the marginality, as also the power of poetry lies, because we know that power comes from the margins. And this is where I think poetry becomes a very, very potent weapon today, as we talk about the International Day of Justice. And we talk about justice every day. In a country like ours, we need to talk about justice every day. And this is where I think poetry can help and is helping to make a difference. So all of these wonderful people that we have had here, you are the finest poets, all seven of you are the finest poets who are writing in our country today. And our debt to you for taking so much time to be a part of this session is immeasurable. So my gratitude to Sanjukta Di for for consenting to chair this event, and for so patiently being with us throughout. All of us have been there throughout, but I think she did not have room even to stir. Some of us were having a gulp of water as also a cup of tea, but Sanjukta Di probably did not have room to stir. She was, she was attached to every word that was spoken here, and she was coming back with it. So whatever she received, she was giving back with her observations in plenty. And we are immeasurably grateful to you for your time. And Sukrita ma'am, when she spoke about how all poets are martyrs, for the cause of poetry, for the cause of civilization, for the cause of justice, for the cause of humanity. She made a very potent statement when she said that all poets are martyrs. Yes, we must suffer in order to it's like a cross. She said that poetry is the cross that all of us bear, and that is a very, very very moving, as also a very pertinent statement today, because there are people who think nothing of poets, so go and write a book is what I am told. So we need to tell them that we are doing more than writing a book. We are changing people's mindsets. And we had Jaideep sir, whom I also need to thank personally for helping me put together this event, because I had never done a poetry event like this before. Our department wanted to do one. And so, the department expresses its indebtedness to Jaideep sir, who was like always, coming up with his responses to all our queries on how to organize and how to put things together. So my thank you to him for helping us coordinate this, and for reading out his wonderful poems. Of course, I have read his poems before, but hearing them in his voice, were very powerful. And the way he makes a statement in his poetry, particularly about Dalit poems, about the Dalit mode of literature and the Dalit mode of protest, because I have not needed to explain Dalit criticism or Dalit literature to my I have not had the difficulty to explain this to my students. I merely give them one sample poem written by Jaideep sir, and I tell them that have a look at it, and then you can come back and tell me what Dalit literature means to you. So his poems have been that significant for me in my practice in the classroom. We have Ashwani sir, whom I have been following for quite some while, whose Flamingo poems and other poems, of course, I have had the opportunity to read over the months, and I feel so grateful to him for sparing the time to be with us today. And he is someone who has been writing consistently ever since the lockdown. He has been talking about migrants. So many of his articles have been up in wonderful newspapers. And the same kind of spirit motivates and informs his poetry also. There's a wonderful poem on Gandhi by him, which I intend to work on sometime very soon. Where I forget the name of the poem, Ashwini sir. If you could just remind us of the poem's title. It's on Gandhi, where and it's and the way he brings out Gandhi as a very polyfaceted figure, and it's very relevant to the political scenario of the present that we live in. Ashwini said the name of that poem, which I miss.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, and now I'm
Your
getting it.
Gandhi poem title.
Yeah, I'm not getting the.
Some connection errors probably. And then we had Nabina's very powerful poetry voices. She writes about the Northeast as also about gender issues. We had Ranu ma'am, whose poems I have been lately following. And when she spoke about English being a very it's a kind of straddling a seesaw, our use, the use of English by Indian poets. She also has a wonderful poem on that, which was recently published in the Bombay Review, where she talks about how English is like a mustard seed for us. And I loved the image because the mustard seed is both necessary and marginal, and it's both indispensable as well as marginal. And of course, last but not the least, we had Saima with us. And thank you, Saima. She had an important meeting to do today, an important interview to do today all of a sudden, and still she could make it back to us. And she wonderfully gave us some very, as Sanjukta Di said, on very contemporary themes about Shaheen Bagh and about what is happening in Kashmir at the moment. So a we had a very rich range of poetic voices across generations, across geographies, on a common theme which was dealt in a very multifaceted way. And then we of course had Sanjukta Di's poems, and Sanjukta Di is one voice who never, she never minces words, and she's very to the point, very pithy, where she wants to put things, and that is a criticism, that is a social critique, which strikes even the most ordinary reader. So the best thing about poetry is when it is simple, and there is no enforced decoration on it. And I have had the fortune to read many of Sanjukta Di's poems. Her latest book, Sita's Sisters, is a wonderful exploration of how she uses myth, to attack contemporary, to make an attack on contemporary practices, social and cultural practices. So overall, I can just express my gratitude to the very talented poets here, and to the very faithful and appreciative audience, because I have been to poetry readings where no more than 10 to 15 people turn up physically. And this is an online poetry reading. We reached a high mark of 95, and then we have dwindled back even till 55. So I think it is no mean achievement for a poetry event to have an audience for an audience as faithful as this for around 3 hours, and many of them joined at 3:30. Many of our listeners were already here in the chat room at 3:30, and I'm very grateful to all of them for being here with us. So overall, it has been a very memorable evening. I express my gratitude also to our head of department, Dr. Asanya Ibrahim, who is always ready to, support us with all kinds of facilities. Even our weirdest ideas get sanctioned from him. So that is it, and we are kind of regretful that we are coming to the end of such a wonderful evening. So that is a formal vote of thanks. Thank you very much for being here with us. And that's a formal vote of thanks. We can still continue the conversation.
Can I have 1 minute?
Thank you very
much. Thank you.
Can I have just 1 minute?
Yes, of course, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am, please.
Goshudhara, you said that people keep on asking you to write books, assuming to write fiction or write short stories. So, but then remember what Ashwini told us, that the days of prose is over. Poetry is crucial, and poetry is going to stay. And poetry is much shorter than novels, and people don't read too much. So I think we are looking at poetry defeating all other genres. Let us think in those terms. And of course, I have to thank Dr. Ibrahim, because if the head of the department does not support a
Yeah,
webinar, it will
that's
never
very
happen.
true.
So you have been so positive, so supportive. It is obvious from this wonderful organization that Goshudhara could do. It's all because of you. Because without the head of the department and without the principal, as Joydeep is looking deeply into, is nothing can happen, and we know. And we know all about authorities. And we say, I can't talk too much about this or that because I need to keep my job. All of us need to keep my job. My husband is waiting. My job is to give him tea now. So I am also going to depart. But this has been a fantastic meet on this particular platform. And my thanks to Karim College, to Professor Ibrahim, and to Goshudhara, Joydeep, and also to all my poet friends. And so, though we do not meet physically and can't meet in the next few months also, I think we are all connected.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Samyukta Ji. Thank you, Ragini, Nobina Ji.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Ashwini. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
So
you,
we end
everyone.
with what
Thank you.
Sukrita ma'am began by saying that we are connected, and we end with this warmth of connection in our hearts. Thank you so much for making this a very memorable evening for us.
Thank
We'll
you.
put up the recording on YouTube very shortly, and we'll post the link on our department's Facebook page. So we'll share it with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Jagdeep, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Lovely being with you all.
Thank you, ma'am.